Hi, this is Pia Knudsen from UFO Denmark. Today I'd like to welcome Kathleen Marden. We've been so lucky that Kathleen has said yes to do an online lecture for our group, and we will be coming in at the end with some questions for Kathleen. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. It's great to
nice
be with you today. And my lecture today is called Understanding Contact. What I'm going to do is to go back and discuss with you the research that I have done, and I do my own original research. I go to archival collections. So I'm going to be giving a little bit about the history of U.S. government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, their findings, their decision to cover up their findings and why. And I'm also going to go into the most recent research that I have been working on. And that comes from 3 major studies that I've done on experiencers. And I'll talk about another study that is ongoing that I and a team of researchers are conducting. So I don't know if you know, but I'm the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And that is a world famous case of alien abduction that occurred back in September of 1961 when I was 13 years old. Betty was my mother's sister. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She worked in adoption. Barney was a veteran from World War II. He served honorably in the Army. He worked for the post office, the U.S. Post Office, and both Betty and Barney were very actively involved in the civil rights movement. In fact, in 1965, Barney was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights State Advisory Committee for the state of New Hampshire. He also received awards from the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity for the work that he did in setting up programs for underprivileged people in the state of New Hampshire. Also, back in that time frame, in order to vote, you had to take a literacy test. And so he and Betty worked on a literacy program to further people so that they were able to read and were able to pass that test so that they could vote in elections. So if you know anything about this story, Betty and Barney are in the picture on the left with their dog Delphos, who was with them when they had their experience, where a craft came in closer and closer and finally hovered over their car, so it started to descend in their direction. And then Barney stepped away. He got out of the car, he stepped away, and it moved to an adjacent field where he observed non-human entities looking back at him. And eventually, they gave him the idea that they had a plan for him and they were going to capture him. This was all part of his conscious, continuous recall. It's in the original reports. Something started to drop down out of the underneath part of this craft. We know today that that probably was sort of like a tractor beam, a beam that would have hit him and absorbed him into it and carried him onto the craft. But he became so terrified that he pulled the binoculars away from his face, breaking the leather strap in the process, ran back to the car, screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. And so he got into the car, he saw this craft moving in his direction. He said to Betty, "Roll down the window and see if you can see it. I think it's over the car." She rolled down the window. She couldn't see it. All she saw was blackness, even though she was expecting to see lights. It was a bright, light night. The moon was about 3/4 full, but she couldn't see it. And then almost immediately, she and Barney heard a series of buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. the tingling sensation passed through their bodies. And the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway. It seemed as if only a moment had passed. They had vague memories of seeing a fiery orb sitting on the ground, and vague memories of a roadblock. It wasn't until a couple of years later when Barney was referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist from Boston, Massachusetts. And this was after Barney became disabled because of the crippling anxiety that he felt over what he saw on that craft, and the physical evidence that he and Betty had that something had happened to them. Her dress was torn in several places. His shoes were so deeply scraped, he had to buy new shoes. Their watches had both stopped working. There were shiny circles on the trunk of their car, and there was a magnetic field around them. Everything, all of those questions built up in Barney's mind. He just wanted to forget about it. Betty wouldn't let him forget about it. She became obsessed with it, wanting to know what happened. So it was very bad for Barney's health. Eventually, they both underwent separate hypnosis with Dr. Simon, and he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. They remembered being taken aboard the craft with by entities who looked like this. This is my sketch based upon a painting by a computer based upon the written material they left of what they looked like, and from my knowledge of what they looked like. And so they were taken to separate rooms, given an odd sort of physical examination. They communicated with Betty while Barney was undergoing his examination. They apologized. They reassured Betty and Barney they wouldn't be harmed. They'd be released. They'd be able to drive back to their home. And so it became a very big story after there was a violation of confidentiality, and the story was released to the public. Betty and Barney knew that their lives would be ruined if it was ever released. They didn't want it to be, but it was published in a Boston newspaper for 5 nights running, and then they agreed to allow John Fuller to write the first book that was ever written about their case. And so I was a social worker too, like Betty, only I specialized in psychiatric social work. And then I ended up going into the field of education, and I taught school for many years. And I had gotten remarried. I had 2 children. I married a man with 3 children. I was doing graduate work, working full-time, teaching, and having all of this family to take care of, and I became ill. And I had to stop working. But I craved intellectual stimulation. So I decided to begin in about 1990 my investigation of my aunt and uncle's case. I met with the original investigators who were still alive. I had all of the reports. I had letters from scientists. I interviewed Betty, playing devil's advocate many, many times. I had all of the original Air Force reports. And I did a lot of research on my own. My husband and I even ended up driving the entire route that Betty and Barney drove in that time frame, from Niagara Falls in upstate New York to Toronto to Montreal and back down through New Hampshire's White Mountains. I did that because one of the big debunkers was saying that Betty and Barney were hallucinating. They had been driving for so many hours. So since we stopped in the areas where they stopped to spend the night and traveled the same roads in the same time frame, I wanted to see if my husband and I, who were then 20 years older than Betty and Barney were at that time, I wanted to know if we would be hallucinating. And we were not hallucinating. So that really refuted what that debunker, who I later decided to call a disinformant, had been stating. So I had a lot of the manuscript captured, written, and then I approached Stanton Friedman. Stanton Friedman was a nuclear physicist. He was known around the world for his work as a UFO investigator. He developed an interest in this when he was working in industry as a nuclear physicist. And he had to move his family so many times because the government funded programs that he was working on were canceled. Then he'd have to go to another company and work on a new program. He had adopted 3 children, and all of those children had disabilities. And it was extremely difficult for his wife and children when they had to move time and time again, find new doctors, buy a new house, everything they had to do. And so he decided that he would try just working as the flying saucer physicist in the UFO field. And that is what he did for the remainder of his life. My aunt knew him well because he was the scientist who was contacted to vet work done on a star map that Betty had sketched as the result of post-hypnotic suggestion. When she was on the craft, she said to the one she called the leader, "I know you're not from around here. Where are you from?" He produced a star map. And so a brilliant woman from Ohio, let me go on just another, this is Stanton when he was younger. Brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, read John Fuller's book, and she saw the star map that Betty had drawn under the condition that she could do it if she could remember it accurately and if it didn't bother her too badly. So Marjorie went to work, going to the university. There were no computers back then for personal use. And she checked, she had to stay at the university with the astronomical catalogs, recording all of the distance data, writing everything down, the characteristics of all of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 55 light years. And then she started to build 3-dimensional models using monofilament line and beads. This is one of her models that you can see. One of her models had 256 stars in their proper 3D location. She made 14 of these models going out in every direction from our sun. And still in 1972, she didn't have a match. She'd been working on this since after she read the book that was published in the fall of 1966. So she had been working slowly for a long time. No match for Betty's map. She thought that she would find many. But finally, there was a new Gliese astronomical catalog released in 1972. It had new distance data. The big problem she had is the distance data varied from one catalog to another. And the reason, I think, for all of this was not only our level of technology, but also because the Earth's atmosphere made it difficult to accurately measure. And once we developed satellites to go out into space, it was easier to do that work. But so finally, she had this new distance data. There were 3 stars that had been located within 55 light years that hadn't been there before. There were other measurement differences that were a little different. She built a new model, and in this model, she had a match for Marjorie's, for Betty's map. And so Stanton was called in as a scientist to find other scientists who would vet Marjorie's work for accuracy. And so 3 scientists were called in. Dr. Alan Hynek from Project Blue Book was one of those scientists. At that time, he was working at Northwestern University, the head of the department, the head of the observatory there. Dr. David Saunders, who was a statistician who worked on the scientific study of UFOs down at the University of Colorado. And then another astrophysicist who ran the Department of Astronomy at Ohio State University. They all agreed that Marjorie's work was accurate. And they also agreed that finding those stars in those positions, as Betty did and as Marjorie found them in star catalogs and building her maps, the chance of this happening would be 1 in a million if it was line length for line length. It was pretty close, and angle for angle. But they thought it was 1 in 1,000 based upon the fact that you can see a difference here to here, where it's shorter, that you're looking up into it. So some of these lines were not completely accurate, which is, they were close enough, the scientists thought, to say that this is what happened, that this is where these entities came from, right here, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli. In the reticulum is the net constellation that can be seen from the southern hemisphere as very small stars. But all of this was considered to be accurate. The important thing here is not just that Marjorie found this match, reasonable match, but that all of the stars on Betty's map were considered to be sun-like stars. And that at that time, only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood were sun-like. And all of the stars on Betty's map were considered to be sun-like stars. They thought that it was pretty remarkable. That was the major thing that was so remarkable about this. So the state of New Hampshire ended up erecting a monument, this historical marker, up in front of the Indian Head Resort in Lincoln, New Hampshire, just north of the field where Barney had that close encounter. And it's about 8 miles north from the abduction site itself. Stanton and I were very pleased to do a tour for the public and a speaking engagement up there in 2011 to a group of people who came to see this and to go on the tour with us. So I was very pleased. I presented the petition to the state with another man from New Hampshire. I had to provide all of the proof that this was really true. And so I did that through sending them loads of documents. I believe it was 25 to 30, and to suggest the text for this. And finally, in 2011, the state of New Hampshire erected it. So I'm very pleased that the state has recognized this incident. Stanton and I went on to work together for many years after he joined me, and writing the book with me and helping me with some of the information that I needed to continue with my part of the book. So we worked so well together, we decided to write 2 more books together. This is our second one, Science Was Wrong. And here we are. I had said earlier that I do my own research. I don't read what somebody else has said and then repeat it. It's important to me to know that the evidence is real and it's accurate. And Stanton was a meticulous researcher. He would never work with anyone who went on the other end of the spectrum. Here we are at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, doing research. I went there several times, multi-day research trips. He joined me on one of those multi-day trips, and it was great to be able to do the research together. So that's a photograph taken. All of our research ended up being published in this book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. So it was about government policy and the government cover-up. And here's some of the information that we wrote about. Captain Edward Ruppelt was the first director of the government's, the U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book. He had also been there for Project Sign and Project Grudge, earlier studies. But in 1952, the Air Force had received 4,400 UFO reports. Captain Ruppelt was very organized, very good at what he did. He did a study on 1,593 cases that were investigated, and he tried to classify, categorize those into various prosaic or common explanations, such as balloons, aircraft, astronomical bodies, other hoaxes, insufficient data. And in the end, about 18.5% were balloons, almost 12% aircraft, 14% astronomical bodies, 4% other, something that they didn't have a separate category for. Only about less than 2%, 1.66% hoaxes, and about almost 23% insufficient data in order to make a categorization. And so in the end, 26.9%, 94% of those cases were true unknowns. That's highly significant. It was a great study. But after that was done, in May of 1952, Dr. Donald Menzel set up an appointment at the Pentagon to meet with 6 military officers. Dr. Menzel was an astronomer from Harvard University, had a very good reputation as an astrophysicist. He was also reputed to be on the US government's MJ-12 committee, which was a top secret committee of scientists and government people to following the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash in order to secretly look into this. Stanton couldn't understand this, the difference here that Dr. Menzel was writing anti-UFO books starting in 1953, and at the same time was reputed to have been on MJ-12. He did a great deal of research. He went to Harvard University, and he ended up finding out that Dr. Menzel had a long-term connection to naval intelligence and then the NSA, the National Security Agency. We call it no such agency here. Very top secret work, and he definitely had a reason then to debunk UFOs, even if he was very heavily involved in the investigation. And in my research and in Stanton's, we found that he was very closely connected with the military as well, traveling around, going to Dayton, Ohio, to the base down there quite frequently, and out to New Mexico, to Alamogordo, and areas where there were observatories and a lot of military research was taking place. Well, what he did is he said, well, we are going to debunk UFOs. I've done a few simple tests, few experiments, and I'm going to write magazine articles saying that this is all atmospheric phenomena, atmospheric anomalies. There's nothing to UFOs. And he said, they're all hoaxes anyway. Well, as you just saw, fewer than 2% were considered to be hoaxes. So General William Garland from at the Pentagon said it's only 2%. And then he and the other Air Force officers ended up just saying, well, we refuse to blindly endorse your few simple theories. So Donald Menzel ended up storming out of the Pentagon because he had not received cooperation from the military. This was May. Now here we have July of 1952, and there are UFOs over Washington, D.C. There was more than one sighting of these, and you can see the newspaper report here, saucer outran jet, pilot reveals. There were military jets scrambled during the first sighting of these. They were seen from the ground. The air traffic controllers picked them up as well. There was a lot of hoopla about that. The news went out across the nation, and the public had a great deal of interest. There had been many reports up and down the East Coast that year. And so there was, of course, the second time in 4 days, flying saucers seen over Washington. The newspaper article said 8 to 12 objects showed up on radar screens flying a 10-mile arc around the Capitol. Radar men estimated the objects, or flying saucers, were clipping along at 120 miles per hour. The second appearance of the saucers in 4 days leaves experts just as stumped as ever. So, here are the dates where this took place, the 19th, 25th, and 26th. And so top government scientists were going to launch an investigation into all of it. There was a press conference called at the Pentagon. It was the largest press conference since the end of World War II. And Major General John Alexander Samford ended up making statements to the public about what was seen. He said, we're not trying to discredit the observers. That's the reason that I said that we have many reports from credible observers of incredible things. There is nothing in the work that can do these things except phenomena. So I was very interested that the emphasis was on the word phenomena, not flying discs. Earlier on, the Air Force was calling them flying discs. Now we're saying phenomena. And he said that these phenomena had been seen in the sky dating back to biblical times, because there were other military officers who made different statements, kind of debunking what was seen in Washington, D.C. as well. And then in January of that year, the CIA Robertson panel met. These were the scientists. And so they met for a few days. They read some reports. They looked at some films. And then they had to make a decision on how the United States was going to handle all of this information. And they ended up saying that UFOs do not present a direct threat to national security. They said that continued emphasis on reporting these phenomena represents a threat to the orderly functioning of the protective organs of the body politic, and that national security agencies should take immediate steps to strip UFOs of their special status and the aura of mystery they have acquired. So this was, it marked a major change. They recommended that members stress the opinion that UFOs should be viewed as phenomena, not as flying objects or physical craft, much as Foo Fighters over Europe during World War II, just orbs, sometimes fuzzy orbs. They should carry out a debunking campaign that will reduce the public's interest in UFOs through television, motion pictures, and popular articles, and that the scientists are encouraged to debunk UFO reports through deductive reasoning. And they should conduct surveillance on civilian UFO groups and their leaders. And they did this for many years. Let me give you just an example of one of the significant reports that they evaluated and the scientists' attitude toward all of this. I think it's pretty revealing of what they did. So a family officer, Navy officer, Delbert Newhouse, and his family were traveling across the United States in July of 1952. They had just left Tremonton, Utah. They're heading for the Northwest, and then they were going to go down to the West Coast. And Delbert Newhouse had 2,000 hours flying time. He was a naval photographer. And his wife pointed these very unusual objects in the sky out to him. He ended up becoming so interested that he stopped his car. He got out and he looked at these disc-shaped craft that were glinting in the sky as the sun was hitting them. They were close, but he decided that he wanted to video these. So he got his equipment, he set up his video camera, and by the time he had set up his equipment, they had moved farther away in the sky. So this is what he was able to video here on the right. So what the scientists did is they looked at this video, they read the report, they ignored the fact that the Air Force and the Navy labs had analyzed 1,600 frames, that the Air Force had devoted 1,000 hours to the analysis of this video. And the scientists took a look at the video, and one of them said, gee, they look like birds that I see flying off the coast of California. And so the other scientists said, yes, we agree, they look like birds. They ignored the scientific evidence presented by the Air Force and the Navy. They said, let's call them birds. We'll send this video back for reanalysis. So that is just one of the things. You know, the frame-by-frame analysis by the Navy and the Air Force said that they were not birds in flight. That was one thing that they considered. And as they closely analyzed them, they said, no, they are not birds. But that's what happened in the United States for many, many years. And here we have Dr. Donald Menzel again, who I talked about earlier. He wrote his first debunking book, published in 1953, and here is his book. We also discovered new Air Force policies that were put into effect after the Robertson panel met. In December of that year, they instituted the JNAP 146 regulation to make it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. Violators faced up to 2 years in prison or fines up to $10,000. That was a lot of money way back in 1953. Another one was the Air Force Regulation 200-2, put into effect in August of 1954. And it said, Project Blue Book will inform the news media on UFOs only when they have been positively identified as familiar objects. The names of the principals, intercept and investigation procedures, and classified radar data cannot be revealed. All unsolved cases are classified. And then another, Carol Bolander, who was a brigadier general in the U.S. Air Force, had stated reports of unidentified flying objects that could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP 146 and Air Force Manual 55-11, which that regulation was in that I just read, and are not part of the Blue Book system. So what they did is they removed all of that information from the public, from the press, from the media. Anything that could not be identified as prosaic was debunked and removed. It did not reduce the American public's interest the way they thought it would. The American public remained interested in UFOs. This is the largest study ever done by the US government. Project Blue Book Special Report number 14, done at the prestigious Battelle Memorial Institute, 3,201 cases. And it was very much like that first study that Edward Ruppelt had done. It was under his direction. But now we have the separate categories, and you will see 21.5% of the 3,201 cases were true unknowns, meaning they couldn't be identified as anything that we knew of on this planet. There was also a chi-square analysis done. There was that in the first study as well. Among the excellent cases, 35.1% were true unknowns, which was a completely separate category from insufficient information. And then Donald Quarles, U.S. Secretary of the Air Force, made this statement about the not the Robertson panel, about Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. He said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as these popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. And as you just heard, it was not 3%. He was lying. It was 21.5%. This is a major study, and I want to just show you this because it was investigated. It was a major case and investigated scientifically. It happened in Delphos, Kansas, quite a long time ago, back in 1971. But it demonstrates U.S. policy toward the scientific analysis and publication in scientific journals. So this is 16-year-old Ron Johnson and his dog back then on their farm. And he was out, it was about dinner time. His mother and father were inside. He was out feeding the sheep. And when this craft came in and hovered over the ground, he said he estimated it was about 9 feet in diameter and about 2 feet off the ground, and he saw a shimmering substance come down from it. He and his dog were frozen in fear, looking at this thing, and finally it took off and made a high-pitched sound as it left. 10 minutes after it was there and it emitted this substance, it formed this mark on the ground. You can see the luminescence there. When people touched it, it caused their skin to tingle. You can see a soil sample taken by Stanton Friedman here. This is a photograph of the ring it left on the ground. And then this is the sample in an area near the ring, but not in the ring. This is a soil sample from in the ring. You can see that it is no longer water soluble, as the sample outside the ring was. Now, one of the scientists who studied this was Dr. Errol Farouk. He's an organic chemist at GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals in the UK. He did postdoctoral work at Oxford and Nottingham. He's had papers published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. He did a thorough analysis, and he said that the ring soil is extremely water repellent, as you just saw in that photograph that Stanton took. It was fluorescent under a UV light. I have to say my aunt's dress was also fluorescent under a UV light. The sample contained an organic compound that would emit light when exposed to air. It was chemiluminescent, and it was a spray that created an elongated section of the ring corresponding to the wind direction that night. So those were his conclusions. He attempted to get his paper published, his scientific paper, in peer-reviewed scientific journals. There were other scientists who also worked, did their own investigation, their own analyses. They were Dr. Hubert Le Chalvier, expert on fungal diseases, and Phyllis Budinger, who had a master's degree, Master of Science degree in chemistry, and she worked as an analytical chemist for BP Amoco, formerly Standard Oil, for 35 years. She's the scientist who did the scientific analysis on the dress my aunt was wearing on the night she was abducted. So he couldn't get this article, the scientific paper, published in scientific journals. So he wrote to Seth Shostak, why will they not publish this? And so what Seth Shostak replied is, you failed to point to one thing that is a scientific clincher. Seth didn't want all of those different pieces of evidence. He wanted one piece of evidence. And then he also said, you can see I was recently on a panel with him and also with Paul Hynek, who was Alan Hynek's son. Here I am in the middle. And so Seth Shostak also said, travel through deep space is impossible. And so the peer-reviewed journal, try after try by Dr. Farouk, finally replied at the end saying, regardless of the quality of your paper, we do not publish papers on UFO evidence. So here we have scientists like Seth Shostak and others who were saying, well, if it was of scientific quality, it would be published. Any scientist who believed that this was real would be scrambling for the evidence and to be publishing this evidence. But when it came right down to the truth on this, this is what the journals wrote. We don't publish papers on this topic, unfortunately. Just an example of what happens in the United States. So we do have photographic evidence. Here is the Belgium Triangle. Very good photograph. We have photographs from the Trent case from 1950 in McMinnville, Oregon, has undergone scientific photo analysis. No evidence of fraud in any way. Also, a gun camera video on radar from a plane in 1957. You can see how similar they are. And you might be familiar with the UFO sightings that took place off the coast of Turkey. And this was through 2007 through 2009. Well, Yeltsin Yalma was a security guard guarding a business right about here on the coast of Turkey. And night after night, these strange craft would be coming in, approaching the coast. And he became so interested in them that he ended up taking his camera in to photograph this evidence. And eventually he was able to acquire much better cameras. It drew public attention, and the public would go out and see it. And Dr. Roger Lear, who was the U.S. doctor, medical doctor, he was a foot doctor, and he went there and he saw it too. So he could attest to it as well here in the United States. Here is a diagram, 29 miles to this island. So these were seen about halfway on one of those films. And this is essentially the distance data. These are some of the photographs that were taken and enlarged through photo analysis of this craft that was coming in. You can see what looks like a couple of figures standing there, and here as well. Up close, this is what they looked like on the craft. I've used my photo program to just not change what there was, but to make it clearer. And this is one that I didn't make clearer. Kind of looks like it could be an insectoid figure. On insectoid photos that I receive, they tend to have these what look like arms that are coming out like this. So finally, the film went to the University of Istanbul and to the Astronomy Sciences Department. And the professor there made the statement that it was all a hoax, it was not real. That was before the film was analyzed. After it was analyzed, he made the statement, quote, "The objects cited in the aforementioned footage that have a structure that is made of scientific material are definitely not made up by any kind of computer animation, nor are they any form of special effects used for simulation in a studio or for video effect. Therefore, in conclusion, it was decided that these sightings were neither a mock-up or a hoax." The footage went on to be analyzed in 5 countries. In all, no one said that it was any kind of a hoax or produced in a laboratory. Now, the big news recently in the United States has been about Navy footage that was analyzed by the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that ran secretly out of Pentagon from 2007 to 2012. And in the first couple of years of that program, the money went to aerospace company engine owner Robert Bigelow. And he set up the NIDS team to analyze the evidence that was received and also to visualize it on what was called the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. So scientists went out there, they observed these very strange phenomena. There were things going on there that you could see UFOs, you could see non-human entities, there were ghost and poltergeist activity. There was a sighting of what appeared to be a prehistoric 5-foot-tall wolf that was tracked to one area by the rancher when he still lived there, and it just disappeared. No more tracks, suggesting that there might have been a portal coming down onto that ranch. I myself have investigated a very similar case in Texas at an airport, highly credible airport owner and commercial pilot, and also spoke to another witness who was a police officer, a highway patrolman in the state police in Texas. I'm not going to talk about that case today. It's in a different presentation I have, but I want to talk about the ATIP program. Lou Elizondo ran that program, and he ended up resigning because of the excess secrecy and because he felt not enough money was being devoted to the study of this phenomena. So you're probably familiar with the footage taken off the USS Nimitz during a combat exercise. This was in 2004, and it was here off the coast of San Diego in California. And Commander David Fravor made statements about this. And this was some of the statements made. It was a whitish oval object the size of a commercial aircraft, chased by two Navy FA-18F aircraft from the aircraft carrier Nimitz off the coast of San Diego. It rotated, and there was a fleet of them observed. They were moving against the wind at 120 knots or 138 miles per hour. Near the end, a maneuver was executed in a manner that is inconsistent with current principles of aerodynamics and possibly indicative of a vacuum environment. It appeared fuzzy, like a fuzzy white ball on radar. Then it shifted to a black disc, and it accelerated rapidly and whizzed off. Naval officials have recently confirmed the existence of classified documents related to the incident that were used to brief high-ranking members of the US government. They said that they did not release this film, but they acknowledged that it was real. And they said that, you know, they have opened up a reporting funnel for naval officers, enlisted men in the Navy, to make UFO reports, but they will not reveal any of this information to the public because of the highly negative impact it would have on US national security. This is a statement by Commander Fravor. He said it was hovering 50 feet above the churn. It was an aircraft of some kind, whitish, that was around 40 feet long and oval in shape. The craft was jumping around erratically, staying over the wave disturbance, but not moving in any specific direction. The disturbance looked like frothy waves of foam, as if the water was boiling. In another report, I read that there appeared to be another craft under the water, and they appeared to be communicating. This finally rose vertically, and then it flew off at very rapid speed. Then the second was the gimbal video, and that was supposedly obtained through a FOIA release, but now the Navy said we didn't release it. It was observed off the coast of Florida, low observability in both the electro-optical and electromagnetic spectrums, no distinguishable flight surfaces, lack of obvious propulsion system, never before seen flight capabilities, possible energy or resonance field of unknown origin. Not only did they see this disk that was dark here, but they saw orbs they called fast movers, and also what appeared to be like a rectangle with a ball in the center. Now, Lieutenant Ryan Grave, who was a pilot and aerospace engineer, made a statement about the lack of obvious propulsion system and never before seen flight capabilities and possible energy or resonance field of an unknown nature. I want you to just look at these photographs that were taken in 1950 and 1957. Compare them to this one. Do you notice the similarity? Most people that I show these to say yes, they shake their head, yes, they look similar. So this is what I have learned about UFOs from the work that I have done through research and for the work that I have acquired from experiencers, because that's actually what I specialize in the most. I also have a very strong interest in the history of government involvement. So that's kind of something else I do and write about. But so what I've learned is that flying discs use counter-rotating magnetic fields in their propulsion system. They can deflect anything that is a threat. Metamaterials are used to make them extremely light and strong. They generate their own gravity field. They jump through time and space. They can travel under the water, in Earth's atmosphere, and in space without any difficulty whatsoever. They can hover in a position for hours. The craft has intelligence. It can be its own navigator, and it knows how many are on the craft and where they are at all times. And now let's move on to the work that I have done without Stanton. I did a lot of the other work with Stanton, who unfortunately passed away on May 13th. He had a heart attack of 2019. And so this is on contact that appears to transcend the physical, yet it is physical and can be non-physical as well. This is my latest book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. It is a book actually written for everybody, not just for experiencers, because anyone who's interested in that topic will benefit from reading the book. I talk about many of the cases that I have investigated, and I'll talk about some of my personal experiences as well in the book. So did my first study on experiencers with Denise Stoner, who was my co-author on the alien abduction files. We did this in 2012. She's an experiencer and a longtime investigator. She used to work for the Department of Defense. She worked for the National Park Service, but she's retired. We did a study on 75 people, 50 were experiencers, and 25 people who had not seen UFOs or been contacted. We wanted to know if experiencers had special characteristics that were not common in the general population. We were able to identify 23 of 45 questions asked on this smaller study. I am also a member of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research on Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters. I'm on their advisory board and I'm a research consultant. I took part in that study of nearly 4,000 experiencers to date. Some very interesting information that we've acquired from that. And then my most recent study was kind of a follow-up on my first study. It was done through the Mutual UFO Network. I'm the Director of Experiencer Research. And this is Dr. Don C. Donderi, who participated in this research study with me. I was very happy to have him because he has his doctorate. He spent his career at McGill University. He's a psychologist and a statistician with a long-term interest in UFOs and contact. Now, he was instrumental in developing what was called the American Personality Inventory. We had two parts to our study. We had a survey for 516 experiencers that we determined were real experiencers. They were not hoaxing this. They were not frauds. And I had built special questions into that survey to be able to separate individuals out who appeared to be hoaxers trying to throw off our research. So I ended up throwing out about at least 50 of these surveys. And then we went to phase 2 with Dr. Donderi. He administered phase 2 to 175 of the phase 1 participants. And he thought that that was a big enough sample. And so those beyond that who wanted to participate just couldn't, because he set the limit there. But they were welcome to complete the API, and Dr. Donderi could give them their results. So what you see here is the American Personality Inventory that was developed with help from Bud Hopkins, the late great UFO abduction researcher, and also a clinical social worker from New York. So in the first survey, they had over 600 questions, and they were able to identify characteristics that they divided into 3 categories. One were those who they believed were real abduction experiencers. They're right here where you see me pointing the arrow. The second group was the control group. Those were people from the general population who took part in this study, who might have been hoaxers. So I hope you can see that. The third group were the simulators. Those were people who were wannabes. They really wanted to be UFO experiencers, contact experiencers, but were not. These are the results that we obtained in the kind of purplish blue color in our most recent study. So 175 people. You see that we had, everyone was pretty much in the abduction category, but except for, you have one here, you have some who are pretty close to the controls, none simulators, and but it was pretty widespread. So we ended up taking the group that was very close to the target and calling them the abductee group. And then we had another group that we called the contactee group, because what we discovered is that most of them were having very positive experiences. So they wanted this contact to take place, as opposed to the abductee group, who at least started out being abducted. So let's see what our results were. We discovered that among the survey takers overall, 72% said that they were less than 20 when they had their first contact experience. Among the abductee group, 80% were less than 20 when they had their first experience. 15% less than 5, 25% between the age of 5 and 9, 15% between the ages of 10 and 14, and 25% between the ages of 15 and 19. We found out that there was an elevated level of Rh negative factor blood among experiencers. So among the abductee group, 34%, whereas it's only 15% in the general population. Among the survey takers overall, 31%. So still elevated, even if their experiences were very positive. And I want to point out, though, that most are Rh negative. I mean, Rh positive. Being Rh negative does not mean that you are an abductee or an experiencer. There is only an elevated level. Still, the majority were Rh positive. But for some reason, there's an elevated population here, and I'm wondering if all of this might have started among the Basque population, in Spain, because today about half of the Basque population is Rh negative. We ask, do you have conscious recall of observing non-human entities prior to being taken or on the craft? And you can see the percentage, 54% of the survey takers said yes, 50% of the abductees said yes. Have you had a close encounter with an unconventional craft at 500 feet or less? 70% of the abductee group had, 65% of the survey takers overall. So this is conscious continuous recall. People are observing these craft at close range at least one time. They're observing the non-humans at least one time, and they have conscious recall of this. Have family members been abducted or contacted? We wanted to know if it was generational. Among the abductee group, 60% knew that it was generational. Among the experiencers, it was down to 41%. So maybe not so much generational in that overall group, but 60% of the abductees. We asked, have you been awake but saw a non-human and then became unable to move or to cry out? I was testing, you know, the debunkers, the skeptics say that it's all caused by sleep paralysis and hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, that none of this is real. Well, among the abductee group, 60% were awake. Some of them tried to get away. They might have thrown something at them, and still they were taken. Among the survey takers, it was lower, 36%. Although almost everyone had experienced sleep paralysis. So it kind of refutes that hypothesis that the skeptics have. Is a hybrid race being developed on these craft by these non-humans, especially the Greys? And so we asked, do you believe that you are a human ET hybrid? 65% of the abductee group said yes. They believed that they had been genetically altered. And among the experiencer group, it was only 25%. They had special characteristics, and I'm going to get to that. Also, have you found something in your body that you believe is an implant? A higher percentage, more than 50%, said yes. Among the abductee group, you can see Roger Lear here. When one of the surgeries is being done, up in the left-hand corner is an implant in the hand of one of the experiencers in an investigation that I did, and hypnosis that I did on this experiencer. Special properties that Dr. Roger Lear and his chief scientist, Dr. Steve Colburn, discovered. There is no visible insertion point and no surrounding scar tissue, no inflammatory response. These implants are coated with a very tough material that resists attempts to puncture it. It acts as if it has intelligence. I've seen this in 2 experiencers who had just had an implant inserted through the lower part of an extremity, a foot or a hand, and have actually been able to feel it as it moved up the arm. One of these experiencers was going to have x-rays done. And before she got in to have the x-ray done, it had traveled up her arm and disappeared. But I was able to actually feel that under her skin and test it with a magnet. Not all of these implants put out detectable radio signals or are magnetic. Some of the older ones do this. So what they found also is that there's a highly elevated level of proprioceptor nerve fibers attached to these, so they're attached to nerve endings. There are, in some, isotopic ratios of meteoric origin, indicating they did not originate here on this planet. The nanotechnology is far in advance of devices manufactured on our planet. And one of them had a radio frequency that could be transmitted into deep space. You know, I was disgusted because as soon as Dr. Lear passed away, the debunkers were out there saying that he was a fraud, that he falsified his evidence. They attempted to destroy his reputation. They do this every time that someone who has a major scientific finding announces it to the public and then passes away. I am just so sick to death of all of this. It's time that the truth be told. In our study, we also found that there is a paranormal overlay in these. 69% of the experiencers overall said that there had been paranormal activity in their homes. I call this bed walking. It's the sensation that something unseen is walking on the bed, and the person can actually feel the weight of it. The percentage was even higher in our first study. Light orbs seen inside the home that appear to have intelligence, doors that open and close on their own, things that fly off the shelves, shadowy figures. My aunt and uncle had this happen not before their UFO experience, but after. And my childhood home, we had this same thing, not before a UFO landed across the street from my childhood home, 250 feet away. Then we started to have this happen in my childhood home as well. So our question was, have you experienced the sensation of unexplained motion in your mattress, such as feeling that something unseen is walking on your bed? Among the survey takers overall, 58% had had that experience. Among the abductee group, 75% had felt that. Light orbs in the home. I just mentioned light orbs, how prevalent it is. Here are two photographs taken from one of the big cases that I have personally investigated. And quite remarkable to get these photographs. In the photograph on the right, this is, I'm going to show you a video in a moment. In this case, that I started to investigate, I believe it was in 2013, he had experience after experience. He submitted physical evidence that was analyzed in a laboratory where his t-shirt had been tan colored and then turned pink in color. Also, he had felt an implant. He had that removed by his medical doctor. It was sent to MUFON headquarters and on to our scientists for analysis. It had dissolved. Even though it was in his blood, we were trying to fool the ETs. I tell you, these implants have intelligence and they don't want our scientists getting our hands on them. And what we're seeing now is that more and more of these newer ones are simply dissolving. But this experiencer got in touch with me. His name is Jim, and he's given me permission to use his name, Jim Schaefer. And he got in touch with me very upset. He had a diagnosis of cancer, lymphoma. And I said to him, Jim, I'm really concerned too, but do you know that experiencers can ask for healing and receive it? And especially among the abductee group, I said, I'll tell you what, you ask for healing and I will ask for healing too. And let's do this telepathically several times a day. A couple of weeks later, he got in touch with me. And he said, he sent me a photograph. The before, his neck was really out, very enlarged. Now, this light orb had come into his bedroom. And he was able to capture it on his cell phone video, slid down the wall, moved across the room. He can sense these things and is able to get them on camera. Dove down into his body. He slept for at least 12 hours. And when he woke up, those nodes on his neck were not even visible. By the time he went in for his surgery, 4 tiny necrotic nodes were removed and they were no longer cancerous. Quite remarkable. And let me show you the video that he captured. Here we go. You're going to see it in a moment. There it is. What's happened here? Keep going. Flying across the room, hovers momentarily over his body and puts out these beautiful iridescent, kind of like tentacles that come down and enter his body. And then you saw something small that kind of shot off. Quite remarkable film. That all of his medical evidence and the video has been submitted to Dr. Joseph Birks, who is a medical doctor on the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. And he has written about this in Free's book. I also have a chapter in Free's new book, part 1 of that book. There are going to be 2 editions. Well, another question we asked is, have you been healed from a physical condition or a disease in association with an abduction or contact event? Among the abductee group, 45% stated they had. It was only 10% among the survey takers. If your ET or contact experience has changed your religious beliefs, are you any of these things? More religious, less religious, more spiritual, less spiritual, no belief whatsoever. We found that 69% of the survey takers said they had become more spiritual. Among the abductee group, it was 86%, quite significant. So we asked, if you could end your abduction or ET contact experiences today, would you? 71% said they would not want to end them. Now, some of our people, our participants, said that they were not particularly happy with what was going on. These entities were not treating them terribly well, although most said that it was more or less business-like. Some said they were kind. But so we asked, why wouldn't you want to end this experience if you weren't happy with what was happening? And they said, curiosity. They want to know the answer. And so I decided that experiencers are the new humans based upon the statistics in our study. Those taken are improved. They're more intelligent, more environmentally aware, more psychic or intuitive and empathic, more spiritual, telepathic, more concerned about planet Earth and all Earthlings. They feel a sense of universal connectedness. And so this is what I have learned through all of my many, many years of research on this topic. Some ETs are sentient beings, and some appear to be artificial intelligence. I'm not set in that belief, but it seems that way to me. They are telepathic. They have the technology to interpenetrate solid surfaces. Some appear to reside in a different dimension than humans as well. So is this interdimensional beings coming here from different planetary systems? Do they have technology to lower their vibrational frequency and increase our vibrational frequency? I still have a lot of questions. I do believe that there are also entities visiting from the astral realm, not from elsewhere, and that many of those entities might be negative. But I believe that these entities who we know as ETs can be differentiated from those from the astral realm because they're scientists. The work they do is very scientific. And because the abductees who interact with them develop these very positive characteristics. They say they're concerned about our level of hostility and warlike behavior, and they're attempting to upgrade humans. They say they're concerned about nuclear weapons and environmental collapse. Some more, their group is attempting to upgrade humans to assist in our development and theirs, our failure to be good stewards to our planet, our failure to care for our fellow humans, and our propensity for war-like behavior presents a danger to the survival of our species. Our level of spiritual maturity is out of balance with our technological development and could lead us down the path to annihilation. Some say that we've done this thousands of years ago in the past. And by closely monitoring family lines, they can document positive changes generationally. So this messages from the MUFON study. One person said, I was told that we must preserve resources, and if we don't, we will experience a decrease in population. Also, we must unite in love and raise our vibrational frequency as a collective. The higher dimensions are here assisting so we can evolve. We must unite and recognize we are all connected so we can evolve and access God consciousness through the fifth dimension. More messages. I saw ice caps melting and an endangered species dying off. It was incredibly difficult to watch. I was told that ecological catastrophic events were on the horizon due to exponential effects of our neglect, abuse, and misuse. We are poisoning our world and all that live on it. And if we don't change our way, we live as a species, we will die. And another saw a barren earth, was told repeatedly about protecting nature and the importance of human unity. This is a study that, and I know I'm running probably beyond my time here, but a team of researchers and I have been studying Kevin Briggs for nearly 4 years now. For 2 years, we met once a month at his home. He lives in the town that I live in Florida. He and his wife were originally from the UK. He was a police officer. She worked for the Leeds University. She was a researcher there. And he started to have contact when he was 8 years old. And he was taken for the first time to Craft, had a missing time event when he was a 14-year-old paper boy. And he met with what he was told was a council, the Council of 8. some of the questions that we were able to ask the council were, what can you tell us about the interdimensional beings versus spiritual entities? This is one of my questions. And I was told there are interdimensional beings that just live in the spiritual. These do transcend the dimensions from time to time. Then we have extraterrestrials from different dimensions. The difference between the dimensions is only the difference in vibrational frequencies they exist in. So people get mistaken between the spiritual and the physical from the different dimensionals. And I was wondering, well, how do I know that anything they're saying is correct? And they said, well, we will give you evidence. The evidence that I received is they said, go out at 5 o'clock in the morning, look out on your lake. I live on a lake kind of without many people around in that time frame. And we'll show you craft. Well, I was disappointed. I didn't see craft. But I did feel a very strong tingling of one of these entities beside me, and received telepathic communication from him. And this invisible craft was rotating above the water and causing a churn in the water. They've shown me many other things as well. I said, well, what process do you use to move a human through a solid surface? And what I was told is, what you consider solid can be changed and altered. They are just atoms with electrons, which are of a certain vibration. We amplify the electrons to different vibrational frequencies, which is just the frequency of the body. And this allows it to move through the wall. So I had talked to actually 3 astrophysicists who have PhDs before this, and talked about this in my book, The Alien Abduction Files, but then later talked to them, and they gave me essentially the same information. Now, this is my latest book. Here are the other 3 books that I wrote with Stanton, and The Alien Abduction Files with Denise Stoner. And so this concludes my presentation, and I will take questions from anyone if you'd like.
Hello, Kathleen.
Hi. Hello.
Hi. Yes, great lecture, really so informative.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, since you knew, since Betty and Barney Hill were your relatives, were they interested in UFOs before the 1961 experience?
No.
Did they ever see the 1951 film, The Day the Earth Stood Still?
Only after their experience. And they took, it was playing in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, an old movie playing at a theater. And I was a teenager at the time. They took my 2 brothers and I to see that. They took us out to dinner until that movie. So it was the first time they had ever seen that. My mother had had a UFO sighting back 3 or 4 years before Betty and Barney had theirs. I didn't even know about that until 1961 when Betty and Barney had their experience. My mother told me the day that Betty and Barney had their experience. And so it wasn't talked about in the family. My family was interested in politics. We did a lot of talking about national and international affairs, a lot about politics, but not about UFOs. Although my mother had seen one. She told Betty and Barney back in that time frame, and Betty was interested, thought it might possibly be happening, but Barney was a confirmed skeptic. He did not believe it, and he said it was impossible.
Wow. And so after it came out in 1965, because I remember hearing that Barney Hill died soon after that.
He died in 1969, February. of 69. Yeah, so he wasn't alive for long. The book was released in the fall of 1966. He was dead in February of 69 from a massive cerebral hemorrhage.
Okay. Pia has a question for you.
Okay.
It's have you heard of many experiencers who have been asked to give DNA for studies?
I've heard that that's going on. I think it might have something to do with, there's a medical doctor in California who is doing this. I have not been in contact with him. I don't know a lot about this. But yeah, I have heard that that is taking place. I would think that a lot of experiencers might be hesitant in doing that because because of the changes, because of the research stating that about 65% of experiencers believe that they are hybrids. There's a lot of concern among the military and the intelligence community about hybrids walking around in human bodies.
Right. Christian wanted to know, what was Stanton Friedman's opinion, his take on the whole Tic Tac UFO story?
Yes, Stanton Friedman's take on the UFO Tic Tac story was that this was indeed an extraterrestrial craft. That it could outfly and outmaneuver anything that we had on this planet. And Stanton knew the history of all of this too. He knew that way back in the 40s and the 50s, people were seeing these things. They, in US military studies, that flying discs had been assessed. They, back in those early days, were describing the same thing, that the flight characteristics that we could not accomplish on this planet, we, as far as we know, can't. But here we have the same thing behaving in the same way.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why now? Why, with the ATIP, the TTSA, all that, and the TTSA is made up with so many CIA people and ex-CIA and skunk research head, why now? Are they like, it seems like they're trying to come across like the white hats in this whole thing, when for years the CIA has obfuscated the whole theme and ridiculed it. Apparently they're the ones that came up with the term conspiracy theory, to just ridicule anyone psychologically who questions the main narrative on this topic.
Yes, and I don't know the reason for this. I read an interview that Tom DeLonge did on this, where he stated that he had initially written letters to the military and to military intelligence, to high-ranking military officers, saying that he had an idea that could save face on all of this, because the military had been covering all of this up for nearly 70 years and everybody knew it. And that he met with them. He had to go to locations where there were military men holding guns. He was a little uncomfortable going into these meetings, but in the end, they agreed to his plan to release this information to the public on a limited basis. And then I suspect that these people who are on the Academy to the Stars of Arts and Science, to that Academy, I suspect they were approved. That's my guess. I suspect, knowing what I know about how everything operates. So I think that they are having they're releasing a limited amount of information. They have a terrific television program, Unidentified. They've had
Yes.
the first series, and now the second series is coming on. Very popular, and they're not giving false information. So I'm really happy to see that too. They're giving documented information on this. So I'm hopeful that this will continue. I've talked, though, to former military men with high ranks, and they told me, don't be too hopeful, because in the end, the government might come out and say, it's all ours, or it's all from this planet. But I don't think that we have that technology to date. If we had developed that kind of technology, why don't we win wars? Why are we still going into space in rocket ships? Why are we? There are so many questions that I have about that technology that defies our physics, denies what we know about aerodynamics, that they're able to achieve. I think it's theirs, not anything from this planet.
Well, do you remember that a few years ago, the CIA came out with a statement, oh, all those UFOs people have seen, there are stuff, are high
There are
technology
stuff. Oh, yeah.
stuff.
That's
Remember
it.
that?
They've done that historically to cover up what they're doing. Yeah, they'd say it belonged to them, or then they would say, oh, it's just flying saucers, or they would come out and say that, but they would create a lot of public interest about supposedly testing their equipment. The thing
Right.
is, the CIA is in charge of intelligence in this country and national security. The problem we have is that militarily, we can't do anything about this. And if people are being taken onto craft and examined, and they can't stop it, how can they accept it as being real? They have to have plausible deniability. Otherwise, there would be public hysteria. Everyone would be
Right.
worried that they're going to be abducted. People would be having an even more difficult time with it than they're having now. So they can't come out and do that because of national security and because of their need to protect the population from information that might be too much for them to handle.
Okay. I have another question from Pia, and she's asking, do you think that there's an increase in experience or contacts, and are people still having contact with human-looking aliens?
Yes, in free study, the human-looking non-human entities they might be humans from the future, are number one, the number one most reported in the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation study. In the Mutual UFO Network study, the gray group, two groups of grays combined, were number one, followed by the human-looking entities.
So it's the opposite?
No, it's not the opposite. It's just if you combine, let me tell you, the free study had statistics on the two groups of grays, but one group was a certain percentage, the other group was a certain percentage, which came out to be a lower percentage than human types. We combined them at MUFON into one. So we agree with that if you take the grays overall, then the grays are most prevalent, but not far behind those are the human types. I have been investigating a case since 2015 that involved contact, 3 people abducted by the human types. And I did hypnosis on one of the people. I'm going to be hypnotizing the second one. And what I know from the first one is that they told her that they had lived on this planet hundreds of thousands of years ago, and that there was an environmental collapse, and that they had the technology to leave this planet and go into space, exploring for another place where they could settle, and that they now have a population in a binary star system where it's twilight most of the time. This group said that they travel through space most of the time, that they can hop through time and space. But they said that they really originated on this planet as humans.
Really? So they said that they originated here about 200,000 years ago, did you say?
Well, they said that sometime in our distant past, they
Sure.
lived on this planet. But they come back to check on us from time to time. They said they're not taking anything, they're just checking on us.
Would they also be checking on DNA, since they left a long time ago and their DNA out in space might have been affected negatively by all that travel?
Not that I know
by
of.
radiation?
They didn't
No?
say that, and they did not take DNA samples from the experiencer.
Okay. I have another question for you. Recently, there was an article, and this was published all over the mainstream media. I think it was like 5 or 6 days ago, about the Navy saying, basically admitting that they did have classified information on UFOs from their observations, numerous observations, but they could not release it because they felt that it was a danger to national security. Could you please comment on that? What were they talking about? What danger to national security?
Well, I really don't know what they're referring to, unless it is the same kind of danger that I spoke of throughout the history of study of UFOs. And Lou Elizondo stated that there was a lot more information that was still classified that he couldn't talk about. You know, the U.S. intelligence would say that, we're going to say that, but that will lead our enemies into thinking that it is our technology. But, you know, there are psychological games being played, and have been for a very long time. That's what the military intelligence community does. So, you know, but as I said before, militarily, these craft can outfly and outmaneuver anything that we have here on Earth. They defy our laws of physics, our aerodynamic laws, and they're just not ready to announce that these are extraterrestrials visiting our planet. I think for, you know, national security reasons, and I can understand that.
Right. Well, you saw that in 1952, they flew over 3 times over the White House, and that's a highly protected airspace, and the Air Force, military could do nothing and get to stop that.
Yes, they did recently. It wasn't within the past, I'm thinking within the past month, they flew over the White House again, and it was kind of covered up. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just one last question is from Christian. He wants to know if there's been any more studies of these implants that have been found in the body of abductees.
Not
any
really.
more ongoing studies?
Yeah. Well, Daryl Sims has been still having. He's a hypnotist, medical hypnotist, but he has been working on this. He originally was Roger Lear's partner, but they split. So Daryl is still alive and still working on this, but there has been no new evidence released. And I think I would know if any new evidence was released on that. So unfortunately, I'm not aware of anything. The loss of Dr. Lear was such a loss.
It was.
To the scientific community. Steve Colburn did a couple of major studies and had some incredible information that he discovered, that he has published. But no, even in the Mutual UFO Network, if somebody believes they have an implant and it's been investigated, and MUFON investigators believe that it's an implant and they want to have it removed, they have to go to their own medical doctor to have it removed. They have to pay for it. We have scientists who would analyze it. But I mean, how can you go to a medical doctor, most people, and say, I think I have an alien implant here in my arm, will you remove it and give it to me for analysis?
Right.
You know, it is your property.
Yeah.
That
and these implants, do they tend to be in certain parts of the body as well?
From what I understand from our research, most are on the left side, although some people say they're on the right side too. But more appear to be on the left side. A lot are in the area of the head, either in front of the ear, behind the ear, around the ear. I have, within the past few years, received X-rays of implants in the jawline, and this is not dental work. The X-rays show these implants. In one case, an experiencer and her 2 children were taken one night. When they woke up, they found what were like drill marks in their gums, and had the X-rays taken, and there were implants in the jaw. We know also of implants that were taken on X-rays, possible implants in the brain.
Okay. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for this lecture. It was wonderful. It was so informative. And thank you so much for having so much integrity and courage to talk about this most important topic. And so doing it so well. Thank you very much. We all appreciate this lecture of yours today. And thank you very much for UFO Denmark. Okay, so have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful rest of the day over there in beautiful Florida.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're in the dark over here now. And it's cold.
I imagine.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. You're a lovely person, and keep going with your very important work.
I intend to. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.